Welcome to Capital Clarity. This has been our, really my favorite event coming here and starting at Idaho Freedom Foundation this year, because it is the time when I get to come out here and meet you and meet our lawmakers. And it's really, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to come up. Today we have a special guest, Attorney General Raúl Labrador. He will be here. He will be here in a few moments. As you can imagine, he has been extremely busy since he took on his new role. So until he gets here, I would like to introduce Mitch Toriansky, Associate Attorney General, who will speak about what the office has been doing and perhaps answer a few questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I looked at my calendar this morning, and I saw that I was to accompany the Attorney General down here, and that was going to be the extent of my participation. And Raúl just stuck his head in my office, and he said, there's some wild stuff going on, and I need you to go down there as my warm-up act. So that's what I'm doing here. I've worked here since 5 January, since a couple days after the Attorney General was sworn into office. It's not my first time in the office. I was in the office from 2005 to 2010. And well, the first thing you do when you take over an organization is, and I should mention I have a military background, but the first thing you do is you make an assessment of what you're working with. And there's an old saying that personnel is policy. You can pretty much figure out what kind of organization you have by the people that you hire and the people that work for you. So the first thing he did was, and he's in the process of doing this now, he looked at everybody who's working in the office. And if the Attorney General's office was a law firm, it would be the largest law firm in the state. We have approximately 120 lawyers, 240 people. A lot of them are paralegals, secretaries, support staff. So, and there are a lot of differences between the skills that you have to have when you're a representative or a congressman and the skills you have to have when you're an executive and you're managing and leading. But what he's doing and what he has been doing for the last couple months, along with doing his best to fulfill all of his constitutional and statutory duties, what he's been doing is he's been assessing what he has. And what he did was he decided that everybody who was in the office, and some people have been there a few years, some people have been there decades, but they're all re-interviewing for their job. And as you can imagine, when you have a job and being a Deputy Attorney General, that's a good job. It's a little nerve-wracking to have to reapply, but I think the process has been really good for the people in the office, because now they understand who they're working for going forward. And it's been great for the executive office because it's been a good way to jumpstart getting to know their people. Thankfully, that's going to be the conclusion of my remarks, because I see the Attorney General just walked in. Ladies and gentlemen, Raúl Labrador.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? It's great to be here. It's been an honor for me to be the Attorney General of the state of Idaho. I think thanks to many of you that are here, if not most of you that are here, I've been able to have this opportunity, this blessing, and this privilege to represent the people of Idaho in the Attorney General's office. It's only been less than 90 days, and it already feels like 90 years. It's been, we have done so much in the Attorney General's office. We have changed so much, and because we're trying to change what's happening in the Attorney General's office, we get attacked every single day by the media, by the left, by people who are not happy that there's a new sheriff in town, that there's somebody new in the office. My vision for the Attorney General's office was really simple. I wanted an office that stopped serving the bureaucracy and started serving the people of Idaho. We needed to make sure that we were following the law, and we were telling the agencies and the legislature and the people who ask us for legal advice what the law is. Now, I tell my friends this all the time. Sometimes I have to give you bad news. You are wrong. The law actually disagrees with your position. I point at Ron because he's always wrong. But I have to tell them the law actually disagrees with you. And if you want to change the law, then you have a job to do and go tell the legislature to change the law. But my job is to make sure that the statutes and the regulations are being followed. And that if any agency or any person working within the government is trying to go outside of those statutes or regulations, that we will follow the law, that we will be specific, and we will direct the agencies to do what they're supposed to be doing. Now, please understand, I don't get to tell them what to do, so they can follow whatever counsel they want to follow. My job is to make sure that they're getting the right counsel from the Attorney General's office. Because every time I heard an agency or a government entity saying that they were doing something wrong, the problem was that they would always say, oh, we're just following what the Attorney General told me to do, and they don't have that excuse anymore. Now the excuse is they don't have me as an excuse. If they want to do something that goes outside of the law and the regulations and the statutes, then that's because they made that determination, not because my office advised them to do. So that's number one. Number two, I wanted to make sure that we were approachable and reachable. So I don't know if you have noticed in the Attorney General's office for the last few years, there's been a lock in the front door. And that lock is still there because I want to make sure that the people that are working for me are safe and secure. However, what was happening over the last few years is that that door was never open. If there was somebody at the door that wanted to talk to the Attorney General's office, they couldn't get into the office. I have told my employees that if you feel that you're safe, obviously safety first, of course, let people in. And people are constantly going into the Attorney General's office and asking because we want to be approachable and reachable. Now, I want to make sure that you understand what that means. I am not your lawyer. If somebody ripped you off and on an issue, you need to go hire your own attorney. I am the lawyer for the state of Idaho and for the people of Idaho, and I'm making sure that the law is being followed to ensure that you are protected. However, if you have a real estate contract dispute or somebody ripped you off, that's not necessarily what the Office of the Attorney General does unless we have criminal jurisdiction over some of those issues. And in some cases, we do have criminal jurisdiction. So if you see me over here and you tell me, hey, somebody just stole some money from me. I said, I'm probably going to tell you, go to the county prosecutors and go to the sheriff. They are the people, or the local police. They are the people who will handle and help you with those things. But we are there to make sure that the Constitution is being followed, the laws are being followed, the statutes are being followed, and that the bureaucracy understands that they work for you, that we don't work for them. And that's really important. Now, I'm going to really apologize because we're in the middle of actually another attack from the press, and I have to get back up to my office and finish what I've been doing for the last hour or so. But I want to tell you something that is really, really funny. How many of you have seen that our Office of Attorney General just filed a lawsuit on the waters of the USA? How many of you seen that? How many of you saw the article where I had a bunch of administration officials attacking me because apparently I didn't care about the waters of the USA issue? How many of you saw that? So if you remember that article was a lengthy article by the Associated Press. That article by the Associated Press was run in every single major newspaper in the state of Idaho, where I had people like Mike Simpson saying that they were disappointed that I was not taking this issue seriously. And I had people who were attacking me for not knowing that this was an important issue to Idaho. I had people who started saying that if they were in my position, they would have filed a lawsuit in North Carolina, where 24 other states decided to file a lawsuit. We made an internal decision, a legal decision, and a tactical decision that we did not want to join the large lawsuit, even though we agreed with the large lawsuit. We decided to join Texas, where only Texas and Idaho were able to file a lawsuit. Last Sunday night, the federal court in Texas froze the waters of the U.S. Rule for two states, the state of Idaho and the state of Texas. And I want to read to you a headline. Waters rule frozen in two states, but unimpaired in 48. So if I would have joined the other lawsuit, this would say waters rule frozen in one state, but unimpaired in 49. So who made the right decision, my critics or the Office of Attorney General? Now, I bring this to you because there are maybe 30 articles in here, all talking about the waters rule. Every single one is from a national publication. Guess which newspapers have not written a piece on the fact that we won our preliminary injunction? The Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, all the newspapers that ran the other story that was attacking me, they decided not to run this story. Now, the Associated Press out of Texas wrote a small article where they barely mentioned the state of Idaho in their article. And to their credit, I'm going to give credit where it's due. One publication in Idaho ran it, and that's KTVB. But they didn't run it as a story, which I think they did run a story on the other issue. They just put it on their website, the Associated Press. That's the only outlet in the entire state that has run the fact that our office did the right thing, had the right strategy, we had the right tactics, and we had a victory that none of the other states have had. Now, don't get me wrong, I like their lawsuit, and I think they will eventually have their victory, but we chose our venue because we knew that it was a place where things were going to happen faster. Now, for good or bad, it could have been bad. You know, we knew that this judge just likes to make decisions fast, and he could have ruled against us, right? So we didn't know how he was going to rule, but we wanted to know how things were going to go in our lawsuit quickly. So when you think about the Office of Attorney General, don't just think that, hey, these guys are, I like Raúl because he's conservative, or I like Raúl because I saw him in Congress. I've actually surrounded myself with a group of intelligent, strategic attorneys who know how to do their job. Because I want, like I said during the campaign, I want the Office of Attorney General to be the best law firm, not just the largest law firm, but the best law firm in the state of Idaho, because we represent you. You are our client, and you need to make sure that you are well represented as the people of Idaho, not individually, please remember, but as the people of Idaho. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. I'm proud of the lawsuits that we have joined. How many of you know that we have an Office of Solicitor General in the Office of Attorney General? For the first time in 30 years, we have an Office of Solicitor General, which is so important. These are the cases, the WOTUS cases and others that we do in the Office of Attorney General. And I want to just point out a few others. The Fairness in Women's Sports Act is something that we're fighting for, not just in the state, but in other states that have similar legislation. We joined a Second Amendment fight, joined the state of West Virginia, where the ATF is challenging arm braces. We joined Texas versus Department of Homeland Security, where they have a parole complaint on an immigration lawsuit. We have sued TikTok with many other states. We have joined 2 or 3 religious freedom cases, where they're going after people, whether they're photographers or other people that are trying to live their values and their religious liberty, and the government is coming after them. We have joined those lawsuits. We joined a multi-state letter regarding the distribution of abortion pills by pharmacies, which we believe violates FDA regulations and staff. And we signed on a letter to Biden on the assault weapons ban that he has done through executive order. So all these things we're doing, and that is just a small number of the things that we're doing in the Office of Attorney General. Because we're doing the right thing, we're going to take flack and we're going to take attacks. And as has been the practice, they're going to attack my integrity, they're going to attack my smarts, they're going to attack everything that I do, but we're doing everything methodically and strategically. And I just want to finish with one thing, and this is a message for conservatives. We need to get our act together. We need to understand that if you have a conservative attorney general, you can't be joining the chorus of attacks to that conservative attorney general when you may disagree with a thing or two. Because I got to tell you, one of the things that I think makes me a good attorney general and had made me a good congressman and makes me a good legislator is that sometimes Brian and I are going to disagree, even though Brian is a good conservative. Well, I always disagree with Ron, but just kidding. I love Ron. So there are times when we're going to disagree. There are times where we may do things that you don't know exactly why we're doing them. Don't question the conservatives, because what you're seeing on the House floor and you're seeing on the Senate floor, the non-conservatives stick together every time. And that's why they win. We need to learn as conservatives that we need to stick together. We need to be strategic. We need to work with each other. This is why we created the Freedom Caucus when I was in Washington, D.C. Because we started seeing that leadership would try to peel one conservative off over here and then peel another conservative off. And then we did these things. And we started meeting as a group. And we met as a group. We had 40 conservatives that stuck together, and we had a rule in the Freedom Caucus, which should be a good rule for all conservatives. If we can get 80% of the people to agree on an issue, we're all going to be rowing in the same direction so we can work together. And we're not going to be attacking each other if you disagree on that issue. That's how conservatives need to learn one thing from the establishment, is that they stick together even when they disagree, because they have a goal that is different than yours. And if we have a different goal, then let's work together to make sure that we make Idaho stronger, we make Idaho fair to the people, and we make Idaho the place where conservative values are always agreed to and performed and followed. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for giving me the time.
Attorney General Raúl Labrador. It's a good feeling to know that somebody with his values and his principles and his mission is there in state government. And they're going to be working full time. So, when the legislature leaves in a few days and they all go back to their districts, they're all still going to be here. So, don't just forget that things are going on. It's easy to take a step back once the legislature's done, but things will still be happening, and they still need our support. They still need our feedback. They still need, us to communicate with them. I don't know how you follow that up, but I've asked two of my colleagues. Ron Nate is our Senior Policy Fellow, and Fred Birnbaum is our Legislative Affairs Director. And they are going to come up and give you an overview of what has happened in this legislative session. The victories, the setbacks, and what we can continue to do to make sure that Idaho is a conservative state. It is the conservative state that people think it is. So do we know who's going first? Oh, there we go. Ron Nate and Fred Birnbaum.
Thanks, Fred. I think we can tag team. So,
I guess, Raúl has big shoes to fill, so I think maybe with two of us, we can do it.
can I say two cool things about Raúl Labrador? Even though he just said he disagreed with me, we agree all the time, by the way. But one is that he's been very responsive. When we at the Freedom Foundation found evidence, and I think compelling evidence, that the Department of Health and Welfare violated Idaho law by directing some funds that were intended for K-12 education to pre-K after the legislature had defeated legislation to send it there, sent that information to the Attorney General's office, opened an investigation, and they're so thorough in their investigation that some of those who are being asked for evidence want to enjoin or stop the Attorney General's office from asking them for more information. So he's really on the ball that way. And another reason I really like what he's doing is he followed up on campaign promises. He's a conservative Attorney General, and he dropped the case against the playground mom right off the bat. I think Fred's going to talk about budgets. I'll talk about legislation, and then you can just pepper us with questions.
So I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon. For those of you who have met me, I'm Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I started there in 2014. I didn't have gray hair, and that's how it goes. I'm kind of known as the numbers guy. I actually mention a lot of policy. And as IFF has progressed, and I see some of our allies out there, we've gotten into a lot of issues, and we're now even more in people call social issues, just because the culture really needs defending, at least that part of it that we agree with and that hasn't been taken over. But believe it or not, there's actually a budgetary piece to this, because as government grows, it's obviously absorbing our resources, meaning our money. And then if it's using that money to grow programs that don't support families, I shouldn't use necessarily the word support, but don't promote the things that make our families thrive, that's not good. And COVID, in many ways, was one of the worst things to happen to this country. I'm not talking about just the people that died, which is very tragic, but it really changed the relationship of many Americans to government at all levels. And of course, we know that houses of worship were shut down, but state liquor stores were kept open, and there are all these essential, non-essential businesses. But another thing that happened, and we're really going to feel the fallout for a very long time, was that the federal government flooded every state with a lot of money. And it's kind of hard these days. What is a lot of money? Millions used to be a lot. Billions used to be a lot. We're in the nationally in the ballpark of trillions. And I think the reason that all this spending hasn't been noticed is that people didn't necessarily see the effects. So when you think of, the federal debt, it's 20 trillion, 25 trillion. Does it really matter that now it's 31.6 something trillion? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm going to tell you why it does and why it's important for you to care about this. So before COVID, Idaho appropriated about $9 billion, and that's roughly fiscal 19 or 20, I can't remember which year. But if we went back, say, to fiscal 14, a decade ago, it was $6.5 billion. This year it'll be $14 billion. The federal government injected at all levels $22.9 billion into Idaho. And what that's meant is a number of things. The government is growing, and the governor's promoting its growth. And he's sort of borrowed a page from the Democrats, which is to call this spending investment. And some of it certainly is, and nobody can disagree with spending money on roads and bridges. We don't want potholes. We don't want bridges to collapse. But it's going everywhere, including to agencies and institutions that promote social justice. So colleges are growing, community colleges, and a lot of these institutions are not aligned with us. So by giving them millions of more dollars, we're actually strengthening them at our expense. And that's a real problem. And unfortunately, because the way this money was provided to Idaho, it's if you don't use it, it's going to go to other states. And that has been nearly impossible for all but a few legislators to push back against. What do I mean by that? So there's some programs like Medicaid. If the state expanded Medicaid, then the state got more money for the expansion. But if the state didn't, that money wasn't put in another state. It just wasn't appropriated because there wasn't an expansion. What Congress did, and this is something that the Democrats are very clever about, is they basically said, money not used is going to be returned. And of course, the assumption is it's going to go somewhere else. And that's the real moral hazard. So now we've completely changed. I mean, if you've heard the biblical money it's actually love of money is the root of all evil, as Christians reminded me when I told that to him, not just love, not just money. But the problem is that this affinity for spending all this money has completely changed the relationship most Republicans now in most states have to government. And they say the same thing over and over again, which is if we don't spend it, it's going to go to California. And then they grow these various agencies. Now, there is a group of conservative legislators who have consistently for a couple sessions resisted that. But unfortunately, it's not enough to stop the spending growth. And we're really strengthening institutions. I'm not talking about bridges and roads, but actually functions of government that shouldn't be the proper role. You know, the government should be involved in some of these things, and functions that are often antithetical to conservative values. So universities, which we wanted to slap on the wrist for promoting social justice, you know, they're getting more money, and they're using diversity hiring statements. So we're actually, I mean, if you're that university, you actually feel, well, all the things I've done are being rewarded. Why would I stop doing them? You're going to continue doing them. And they just sort of brush those aside. And public education, of course, is getting a massive influx of money. And this is even after you adjust for inflation and you adjust for per pupil growth. And of course, you know, their view is, well, for being showered with money, we're obviously not doing anything wrong. I mean, it's like your parents give you dessert. Probably didn't get, at least my parents, that's what they would, the first thing they'd take away. And I don't eat dessert much anymore as a result, I guess. So our role at IFF is to actually look at many bills, but we're now reviewing every single appropriation bill. Because what's happening, as I'm standing here just about, at least it will happen after lunch, is that in the last few weeks of the session, they'll appropriate $14 billion. And legislators are not really given a lot of time to either analyze the spending itself. It's just it's a one-page summary. So that's what we're doing. And where does this all go? I think what you're going to see, unfortunately, is that the federal borrowing, which has led to inflation, and now the federal government, or I should say the Fed, is raising interest rates. There's going to be some sort of, you know, economic, I don't know if I'd call it a crisis, but a day of reckoning. And I think that's the time that conservatives have to be properly informed, because, you know, government has had its appetite whet for this money. Of course, revenues go down, and they're actually going to lay permanent claim to it. Well, you grew this agency to this size, you know, we're not going to let you shrink it. And that's what all of us have to be ready for. It's because, as we've seen, it's virtually impossible when it's flooding in to say no to it, at least based on the evidence of the last 2 years. And when that shift occurs, conservatives have to be the ones to use Raúl's point, to agree on 80% of what we need to reduce, because there'll be some differences in terms of what government does. And so sadly, this session, again, the spending's been very large, but people are starting to realize, I think, in the legislature that it's not sustainable because they're seeing some very big percentages. However, there's not a majority. And so unfortunately, like with many things, we're going to have to see the worm turn a bit. And then conservatives are going to have to seize that high ground. They can seize it in part by saying the spending has been very inflationary. The spending has, they tried to offset the spending by raising interest rates, which hurts all borrowers. Now we have to reverse it, and we have to take the lead on that. And we're ready to help legislators, the public, anyone understand what the priorities should be. I want to turn it back to Ron, and then when we're both done, we certainly want to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions about anything. Ron, back to you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Fred. He said, what was it, $31 trillion of federal debt?
31.6.
31.6. I did this was years ago, but I can do the simple math in my head. But I was on my lawnmower one day and I ran over a spoon that my kids had left in the yard. And you can imagine what happened to that spoon, right? It's kind of mangled. It started me thinking. And so I'm there. Sorry for this long story, but there I am mowing the lawn and I'm thinking, man, that lawnmower blade must be going super fast to be able to mangle that spoon that way. And so I did a quick search while I'm on my lawnmower, how fast the blade goes around. It's 3,000 revolutions a minute, 50 times a second it goes around. And so at the time, the national debt was only 14 trillion. And so I went and did some backwards math. Do you know how long my lawnmower would have to run to rotate 14 trillion times at 50 times a second? 9,000 years. So now we're at 31 trillion. We're talking close to 20,000 years of your lawnmower running to pay off that much debt. It's amazingly high. Well, while we're talking about high numbers, Medicaid in Idaho is out of control. $4.7 trillion, sorry, $4.7 billion budget. Sounds like nothing, right? 14 billion revolutions only takes 9 years. So, well, yeah, but a $4.7 billion Medicaid budget was defeated on the House floor a few days ago. They brought it back, and JFAC defeated the motion to reduce it by about 800 million because we should be removing the ineligibles. And if health and welfare were on its game, they would remove all the ineligibles, and that would be about $800 million worth of savings. But JFAC could only get a budget that was $152 million less than before. But I know that sounds like nothing compared to 4.7 billion. It does. But we have about 100 budgets in our budgeting process each year. And so that's, if you do the math, that's a little bit more than $1 million a budget, if you thought of that. And so 152 million of the biggest budget in Idaho history being taken off is an accomplishment. We can do a lot more, but it's an accomplishment. 152, that's $70 for every man, woman, and child in Idaho. So that's a savings right there. But it shows even that little savings on that one budget, we have a lot of work to do on all the other budgets as well. Okay. I want to talk about legislation because that's what I promised to talk about when I came up here. We've seen some good, some bad, some ugly things go on in our legislature this year. First of all, let's talk about some good things. House Bill 71 got amended yesterday in the Senate. It's already passed the House. It's on track to be voted on the Senate floor, and it's probably going to pass. And that bill is prohibiting transgender surgery and hormone and puberty blockers on minors in Idaho. Another bill along those lines is preventing children from getting harmful materials in libraries and schools. Why that loophole was ever in our law, I don't know, but closing that loophole, or at least providing recourse for parents who have had kids harmed by that material, House Bill 314, is on track to pass the Senate as well, and that deserves a little applause. But I need to give credit where credit's due. The Idaho Family Policy Center, Blaine Kanzati and Christian Welp working together have done a lot of work to get those bills where they are. And so they deserve credit and the applause too. Policy on bathrooms in schools. Girls in school should not have to worry about a boy or a guy dressed as a girl invading their private space and invading their privacy. Senate Bill 1100 made it to the House. I'm not sure on its status right now. Did it pass the House floor? Signed by Governor. Signed by the governor. It is now law. That's great. Thanks, Blaine. Okay, now let's talk about some bad. House Bill 24 narrowly passed the Senate yesterday. It is a Biden-type jobs program for high school graduates, giving them money to go to school, to go to college, only for the jobs that the Workforce Development Council wants. By the way, the Workforce Development Council, appointed by the governor. Big business leaders. It's amazing how many of those big business leaders, they kicked me out of committee just across the hall. They kicked me out of committee when I mentioned this in the committee room, that a lot of those members on the Workforce Development Council come from companies that that donated either to Brad Little or the Friends of Little PAC in the last election. And I'm not just talking $1,000 here or whatever. It's $20,000, $168,000 from one company towards those PACs, that they now have membership on the Workforce Development Council. Brad Little is proposing this Idaho Launch Program, and this Idaho Launch Program gives the Workforce Development Council the ability to direct those funds to the in-demand careers that they see fit. Now, is there any doubt in your mind what careers those monies will be directed toward? Maybe ones that benefit those companies? And even take out the cronyism. Just having a socialistic program where some committee somewhere is supposed to direct kids to what they think are the best jobs for the kids, instead of the kids deciding what's best for themselves. It seems creepily communistic to me, and I think that's something we should have avoided. At the same time, we can't get school choice passed in Idaho. You're disturbed about wokeism in your schools. You're disturbed about the curriculum or the little horror stories of what kids are being taught in their classes. The antidote isn't another law from Idaho saying, hey, you can't teach that or you can't do this, because they will always shift the goalposts. They'll always change the language. They'll change the curriculum just in a way to be able to teach what they still want to teach, but not by the same name. I think the only true antidote to public schools gone awry is the ability for parents to direct their kids' education in a competitive market for education. We need to do that. We're going to keep working on that. Unfortunately, Senate Bill 1038 failed. Senate Bill 1161 has been pulled from the Education Committee over in the House. And so it looks like, for all intents and purposes, this session, we're not going to have any realistic school choice. So that's a bummer. I guess that's the ugly. One more thing. Let's talk about taxes. There's only one meaningful tax bill this session. That's House Bill 292. It's a modest decrease in property tax liability. We need to make sure that as we reduce the liability, the burden on property taxes on homeowners, by distributing money towards school building and towards local governments, we make sure that those local governments also don't just raise their budgets and therefore raise the taxes right back again. So we need to work on that. And there's been a few other wins. We stopped some legislation on critical infrastructure, trespassing, which would really have violated your First Amendment rights to be able to access and protest at places where you might want to protest. That was World Economic Forum legislation that was being pushed down to the states, including Idaho, and we were able to stop that. So that's a good win. That's a good win for us. And that is my, I I almost forgot the big one. SJM 101. Have you heard about this bill? The memorial about immigration? It is, I guess the best way to describe it, it's a pay-to-stay amnesty scheme that they want to send to Washington to say, hey, Idaho, we want strong borders, but before you even strengthen and secure our borders, we want to make sure that immigrants here, even though they're here illegally, can still work and live. And so they provided this scheme where if they pay a fine, they can stay here. They can't get citizenship, but they won't be kicked out. They'll have kind of a residency here that they can stay and work even though they're illegal just by paying a fine. We should never accept a pay-to-stay amnesty scheme in Idaho. It was passed by the Senate, unfortunately, and you can identify which senators did that, and it's on to the House, and so we need to make sure that either in House committee or House floor that memorial doesn't get signed and then sent to Washington to tell Washington that Idaho's totally cool with the Biden-era immigration plans, okay, because we're not. And I think that's all I had on my legislative review. I think it's time for questions. Fred, come on back up here. And Daryl, I think your hand was up first.
What about the grocery tax? Is there anything like that?
I'd love to address that one. One of the challenges we have here with tax policy, it's one of the most restricted by leadership. So many of you who have been around for a while know that chairmen can, what they call put bills in drawers. Thank you for doing that, by the way. And that means they're not given a public hearing. When there's no public hearing, there's no chance for the public to weigh in. There's no vote to hold anyone accountable. And tax policy is I would say, one of the most restricted. So this current chairman, the prior chairman, and the chairman before him of Rev and Tax all would not even allow the introduction of grocery tax bills. So there was no hearing. There was no bill number. And this is something we've been battling. Whether or not you think that that's the most important policy, it really wasn't given the light of day. And in fact, the tax policy that passed, so just to give all of you a rough estimate of the impact, for homeowners, there's sort of two pieces and it's complicated, but you'll get about 140 million of relief on roughly 1.1 billion. So this is just the homeowners piece, not commercial, not ag. So, maybe it's 12, 13% on average. We'll all take that. But that was the only bill on offer. No grocery tax relief. And something that Ron alluded to earlier when we talked about tax policy, the scale of it, it's pretty small when you consider we had a $1.5 billion surplus, which has now been absorbed by various spending programs, some of them legitimate like infrastructure, some of them not. So that's it. Tax policy has really been shut down by leadership. All we got was one bill that had roughly annual relief of $140-some million. Well, the chairman of Rev and Tax is Jason Monks. Before that was Steve Harris. He's no longer around. And I'm not trying to pick on Jason, but I think if you went and asked him, someone should do that. Why wouldn't you hear the bill? You don't have to vote for it. I'd be interested in what answer he gave you.
Does the IFF keep track of how many bills each particular legislator submits? Like maybe it might be Democrat. This is what.
I'll repeat the question. I'm sorry. So the way it works, for those of you who've been on the legislative website, you can actually see all the bills. And of course, if you have an introduction, then it gets a bill number. If you don't, then you wouldn't really know. So if any bill successfully introduced is listed 500 or 600. So you can see who's introduced what generally, because the bill will have, almost always, unless it's an agency bill, it will have the legislator's name, but there's no search function. You'd have to do that manually. So it's not, these are all PDFs. There's no spreadsheet, so you'd have to create your own. Now, all the bills that we rate, we certainly rate bills, we score them, and then you can see how legislators voted. But if you wanted to actually do that, you'd have to, and we don't, you'd have to create your own search function and go through year by year, bill by bill, and see who introduced what. Yes, sir.
In addition to 314, what bills can we currently be fighting for with our legislators to get them over the finish line?
Great question. It's what can we help fight across the finish line? So House Bill 71 is amended in the Senate, and then 314, which I guess is going to be amended in the Senate. So those are really important ones. I'm trying to think of some others. Anything come to mind?
That we want to have passed. Well, there's
Yeah.
some to fight against as well.
Well, that's important too.
Yeah, fighting against SJM 101 is important.
Yes.
Fighting, well, maybe, what's that? Oh, SJM 101 is the immigration pay to stay amnesty bill. House Bill 71 and 314, they're both in the Senate. You might want to talk to your senators about making sure those happen.
They have to happen fast because they have to go back to the House for concurrence. Representative Gallagher, then you. Well, it just failed, 17-18. So, very briefly, so this is a bill that would require cell phone device manufacturers to install some filters. I won't get into the weeds, but there's often well-intentioned legislation, but it's either poorly written or it's not going to do exactly what it says, and it can be very challenging to vote no on that. And this was one of those, but it was a very close vote. Go ahead. Then Mike, it's next.
Can we get the chairman of the Senate State Affairs Committee to bring up 189 so that the Julie Ellsworth can exclude companies from contracts that boycott industries that are important to Idaho?
So I'll repeat the question. It was about 189, and I think, is this ESG related? There was an ESG bill that passed. I don't remember the number. There were like 2 or 3 pieces of legislation. I mean, fundamentally, the only way you can convince a chairman or chairwoman to change their mind is to activate the grassroots, because if they've made the decision, generally leadership, unless leadership wants it themselves, won't press them. They'll just say it's the chairman's prerogative. Now, maybe they totally agree. So that's sort of where you have to do the grassroots pressure. In fact, that's what people can do, and say, we want this bill heard. But other than that, it can only be a verbal ask. That's it. And they have the prerogative. If it hasn't been introduced, then obviously it doesn't have a bill number. There's a procedure to call a bill from the floor. But unfortunately, in my 9 sessions, I can't think of that working once yet, actually calling a bill. So that's very hard to do. Mike Kingsley, representative.
Is there any way you can maybe let people know about the recent veto override vote? And now that it's so important that we need to let these people know what's actually going on.
There is a very reasonable bill to allow parents to help train their kids to drive. I remember my dad taught me how to drive a stick shift. How many people here can drive a manual transmission? Wow, that's pretty.
All the old ones.
So that's good. Maybe someday that's all that'll be around. Right. So the governor vetoed the bill, and I think what Representative Mike Kingsley is referring to, and this has happened unfortunately a number of times, people who vote for the bill, something happens to them after the governor vetoes these legislation, and they flip-flop. So they voted for the bill, but they don't vote for the override. So, I don't know where the inconsistency was. They didn't believe in the bill, or they don't believe in opposing the governor, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
It's the latter. It's the latter.
I'm joking. The problem is we've actually set a pattern in the last several years. There have been some overrides, but and I'm not saying that was the most important legislation, but legislation to restrict the governor's emergency powers, which passed overwhelmingly and was vetoed. There was 5 senators who flip-flopped. And so now essentially the governor has been emboldened to veto bills. And his track record has been pretty successful in doing that. So that's what you're getting at. That's what we're seeing, unfortunately. And this one wasn't close.
Yeah, it was 21 representatives changed their yes votes to no because the governor vetoed it. Now, are they working for the people or are they working for someone else?
I have an economic question, and I know both of you can answer this, but can you explain the economic principles that are in play from the COVID shutdowns up to the point of the launch bill? And what my question specifically is people are confused about what a public-private partnership is and what socialism is and what communism is and what corporate welfare is. Can you explain what the state of Idaho operates under at this point?
I'm going to do it, and then I want
Go for
Ron
it.
to give his piece too. So that's a two-person answer. So let me sort of paraphrase it. Did the COVID emergency sort of recast the relationship between business and government in Idaho, or how has it changed and how has it been used to change it? And I think that goes back to my intro, and the answer is yes, it did. So take two steps back. When the COVID emergency happened, there were certain businesses that were allowed to remain open that were called essential, and that others weren't. And then the federal government stepped in and said, we're going to provide financial relief because we ordered the shutdown. So what? Well, fast forward to now, I think a lot of the distinctions have been blurred. And I don't want to get too much into labels, communism, fascism, corporatism. I think you can certainly use the term corporatism or cronyism. And what you're seeing is business and certain industries have realized it's a lot easier to hire a lobbyist and to get a tax preference or to get something like the launch grant than it is to innovate, than it is to do the hard work of being a successful industry. And it's a lot of work to develop a new product to run more efficiently. It's a lot easier to show up and say, train my people and give prospective students who want to be welders that my business needs $8,500. So to answer your question, we are absolutely seeing a shift in the direction of blurring the lines between what is in the private sphere and the government sphere. Defenders say, well, we've always built roads, we've always had colleges, and they use that to continually push the boundaries. Sure, roads are a public good, utilities are, but now we are going beyond that. And as Nate pointed out, not only are we rewarding certain industries, the government is now essentially rewarding whole segments that are related to its personal preferences. So if the government says chip manufacturers are important, we're going to go help them, but we don't like this other industry, it could be firearms, could be whatever, you're actually taking all of our tax money and funneling it to one industry. And I think that's very bad. And it also whets people's appetite. Think, well, I better go get a lobbyist and go knock on some doors because I want my carve out. Would you like to add something?
Sure. One of the favorite phrases in policymaking when you're trying to build a program or solve a particular problem is to say we're creating a public-private partnership. And it sounds nice. It sounds good that, we have the government partnering with industry to do what's best for the people. The problem with that, though, is when government partners with industry, the incentives change. Industry is partnered, usually meaning they have skin in the game. They're contributing to it in some way. They're paying for it in some way. And then government, to maintain that partnership, has to do what the industry wants rather than what's the best for the people. And I'll point out one, STEM Action Center sounds great. It's a partnership with industries to get science, technology, engineering, and math skills into the kids so that they can be prepared for the jobs of today and the future. That's what's said, right? But when industry is involved in at least partly paying for that, then it's going to suit the needs of industry perhaps more than the kids. And that's one big problem I have with Idaho Launch. It's the same thing. It's that industry is, ostensibly this is a scholarship for the students to go and get training in in-demand careers. But ostensibly, it's really public dollars training up the workers that the industry needs. The industry, like Fred says, has hard work to do to get the workers it needs and to build the products they want. But they should be the ones bearing the cost for that, not the taxpayer who has been crushed by inflation for the last 3 years. And so whenever I hear about that partnership thing, the red flags go up for me, because there's nothing so eternal on earth as a government program. And if that's going to stick around, it means the government has to cede some of its decision-making authority to them. And another thing I noticed in the legislature too is you have this dichotomy going on all the time. Now it switches in weight from side to side, but it's this: is we need to structure tax policy and regulations and to make it a business-friendly state so that we can attract businesses that will hire our kids for the best jobs possible. We need to always do stuff to attract businesses, to create jobs for our workers who need jobs. And at the same time saying, we need to spend money on training up workers to fill these spots that we can't fill in these businesses. Now, which is it? Do we have a shortage of jobs or a shortage of workers? We can't have both at the same time. So, and I've heard those arguments at the same time. And so, but notice that if you use those questions to drive policy, you're always driving policy that takes taxpayer dollars to benefit business somehow, every single time. That, we have a shortage of workers. Well, we need to spend taxpayer dollars to train up the workers. Oh, there's not enough jobs for our workers. We need to spend dollars to incentivize businesses to come to Idaho. Every single time we're spending more dollars to benefit businesses. I say we just get government out of the way, let people have low taxes, more money to spend at businesses, and let those dollars drive decision-making in Idaho instead of politicians.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ron Nate and Fred Birnbaum. One of the reasons I love working here at IFF, and I've really enjoyed it, is just being in the office with those two men is, helping me learn so much just by being around them and hearing conversation. I've learned more about how government works in the last 2 months than I did in my entire previous 40 years. And that is why we have these, capital clarity sessions, to bring that to you, to bring transparency, to make connections, because that's how our government works. If all our legislators hear from is the lobbyists and big businesses and the special interests, then they're not really representing you, because they don't hear from you. Your voice is drowned out, and that's why IFF exists, to amplify your voice. So this is the final capital clarity. They're going to be adjourning very soon in the next few days, but we're not going anywhere. Our office is still just across the street. We will be doing more events. We will be publishing more research papers. We will be publishing the index, the final index, so you can see how your lawmakers voted on the freedom and spending and education bills. And we'll have that out for you very soon. We'll be hosting more Legislature 101. We did that a couple of times last year before I started, and I'm looking forward to hosting a few more of those so that, in between this session and the next session, you can get a little bit more experience, get a little bit more knowledge of how the legislature works and how you as an informed citizen can be more useful to the cause of conservative values and liberty. In the back, we have a few of our publications. Pick one up if you don't have one already. We have a sign-in sheet if you want to receive emails from Idaho Freedom Foundation about capital clarity, about Legislature 101, about everything that we are up to and letting people know about. Please do that. Again, if you've already signed up, don't worry about it. You're already on the list. And with that, I thank you all for coming for these past 11 weeks, and I wish you a good spring.